welcome all of you to this sixth day of the continuing GIAN JNU lecture series by Professor Fausto Fraisopi on the emergence and understanding of of complex world. Yeah. And Fausto told me yesterday that it's now become more complex. So
no, I try to spare and avoid high technicalities.
Yeah. So sorry for all this starting problems with the audio-visual, which is something which is unavoidable. So I'm happy that at least some of the participants remain committed to this lecture series, and I hope you have enjoyed the previous ones and the 4 ones we still have. Yeah. So
thank you so much, Babu, for the introduction. So, as you know, when I have to teach you work on what you can say and what you can shape, the things has to be said, and then after giving the slides, I was just puzzling about a sort of more concrete introduction. Is concrete not in order to grasp the concreteness of things, but the concreteness of the structures and the problems we will face today. So let me quote 2 things that will introduce us to the today topic. Okay? Don't fear, I will not approach such technicalities in the session, just in order to smell what it is. So by retrieving a sort of paper that I use for further formation for professors about modeling and complexity in ecosystems, so something that must be even on the table of many policymakers today, we can read. Let's do not consider attentively the first part and just consider attentively the second part. A process-based model such as the present model, the model that the scientists present in the paper, of a termite ecosystem may provide some insight in ecology. In recent years, a growing body of studies in ecology has promoted the conceptual view of socio-ecosystems functioning that we refer to here as a potential surface. And what we need to fix out is potential surface. Then comes the amazing. Although it has sometimes be called by other names, the principle remains the same. This metaphor suggests considering any ecosystem, even socio-political ecosystems, okay, as a ball rolling down onto an hypothetical landscape made up of a surface in a higher dimension space. You have not to handle with such things, just to catch up even the technicality of the metaphor. Okay? I read newly. This metaphor suggests, just in order to catch intuitively what it is, yeah?
Could you just repeat the metaphor of a ball rolling down?
Yeah, I will repeat. I will repeat this very soon. So it's just a metaphor, okay? There is no technicality inside, or seemingly no technicality inside. This metaphor suggests considering any ecosystem as a ball rolling down onto a hypothetical landscape made up of a surface in a higher dimension space. So you have, in order just to catch the metaphor, not just in order to discuss about it, handle with it, and so on and so on. To think a high dimension surface, okay, 15, 17 dimensions, okay, a high dimension space that let us grasp a sort of surface on which, or by which we can think a sort of landscape, on which the ball is rolling down. Okay? This is just a metaphor. Why I say that? Because not with such scientific things, but with modeling of ecosystem, every policymaker today has to do with, or should do with. Okay? So they must have people, the politicians must not have scientists, but like we had Angela Merkel, for example, but should have on the table people that can explain or that can know to explain, counselor, advisors, and so on, grosso modo, that is even roughly what it is to think an ecosystem, or to handle with reports that entail model of such thing. You can measure the distance between our every speeches on ecosystem, climate change, and so on, and the change of worldview that it needs concretely, not concretely because I say that it's concrete, concretely concretely because the model by which we suggest some conclusion or some decision to take are made of it, okay? But let's come back and consider the idea of metaphor, okay? Why? Because not only from an epistemical, but also from a societal point of view, such abstraction, although we have the easy way or the alibi to take such higher abstract things as non-existent. Okay? I don't see it. What say the negationist? I don't see it. Show me where it is. Okay? I have a long, hard, and utopistic work, because the negationist will be negationist, and not because he's grounded on thesis and so on, to explain to him that the model built in such way show us something. Show us. Not by chance, we had to do, and you can find in the chapter 4 of What is a Complex System, with many forms of negationism about complexity, okay? Or nihilism, what they say about complex systems. I read just in order to introduce. We'll talk about other stuffs. The most negative view of complexity is simply that there is no such thing. The word is simple. Well, why ask beyond? The word is simple. Why you go to search, you struggle in order to see better what cannot be seen. Okay? It's the same things that people suggest in the cavern of Plato. Okay? It's simple. There are two-dimensional images moving on a screen, okay, shapes. It's very simple. Similarly, it could be argued that complex system is a vague and ambiguous term that covers a variety of things, and that complexity science is just a collection of techniques and methods that does not have a domain of its own, and why it does not have a unique domain of its own, that they lack of scientificity. In this way of thinking, which we can call nihilism, or we can call about complexity of the world in a non-epistemic view, negationism, there are very different ways that different sciences are combined to study complicated systems, and complex systems are just complicated things we study with interdisciplinary science using computers. Okay? If you will, the two things that we mentioned in this such introduction or preliminary remarks are closely related, and not closely related to either technical stuff, but closely related to our way to approach the world. Okay? There is a very, very interesting, it's not interesting, it's very funny anyway, action movie. This is Swordfish Code from Hollywood. Then an agent say the people believe what they see. Okay, then it's very simple. There was about illusionism, Houdini, and so on and so on. But there is what we see is not just what we perceive. That is a radical different philosophical intuition of Plato and of all essentialists, of all realists about formal structures and so on and so on. So let's go to our topic today. You can read. We have to do with this relation. Model, theory, model, and ontology. Because then nihilism or negationism plays in the spaces in between, or about the relations in between. They are the spaces of the relation between theory and model, or models in plural, or the spaces, the different way of catching between model, in particular model validation, and ontology, okay? Or, if you will, experimental check of something. And on this triptychon play our capacity to renew our worldview, or to renew our approach to world as a complex dimension, or to deny it, okay? And then you can find a summary I will not read, but you can find many things that we are already saying, okay? So, we will start with a sort of approximation, and that is already the hard thing to conceive epistemically and philosophically, but not the identity between model and image. We have brought by our cultures to identify a model with an image, okay, or with a copy. Then we will shortly, very shortly, unfortunately, approach how image and then model, if model is associated to image, function along the history of philosophy, in particular on two turning points, Plato and Kant, okay? Then we will show give a brief outline of epistemology of modeling, and then we will approach models in complexity science by knowing that in the background lies also our ontological questions. Okay? That is, what it is and how I can catch it, if it exists, is framed by this problematization. Okay? So that's introduced to our tomorrow discussion about ontology or meta-ontology of complex systems. Okay? Not by chance, we begin with Plato. Because if there is a moment where many things converge together of our civilization, even if you come to the East, you filtered it by the West, by science of the West, and even by science, modern science, is that image is not an originary being. Okay? That's, you can say. Image is simply, in the best case, is a copy. In the worst case, is an illusion. Okay? A phantasm, a ghost in my mind. Okay? So, and it's happened when Plato, after the crisis of the first theory of ideas, and I will not go too deeply into the stuff, and the theory of participation, what we call metexis, okay, redefined, this is Parmenides' first part, and after having tried to establish a theory of knowledge without normative instances like ideas by anaporetic issues or with anaporetic issues, it means the Theaetetos make the most radical act in the history, at least of Western philosophy, that is grounded metaphysics, that will be then refined, revisited, but taken in great part by Aristotle's metaphysics, okay? And that's happened in the sophist. From a social point of view, it's very important because we are in a very specular situation, okay? Now, by negationism and so on, we are almost, with complex system, but not only, we are almost in the same situation, okay? We have the old world, for Plato was the archaic world and even the pre-Socratic world. For us is the word of Descartes, and the word of our tradition, and so on, does not allow us to find a certain, with our grammar or with our culture, a certain criterion between truth and illusion. It was the same also for Descartes and so on. Not by chance, what you find in movies or in cinematography and cinema, in many movies, first of all, you can watch Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, Cameron Diaz, and Penelope Cruz. That is sort of remake of a movie made in Spain that name is Abre los Ojos. Comes fully from a novel or theatrical piece coming from Calderón de la Barca in the 17th, 16th, 17th century, named La vida es sueño, life is a dream. You can echoes here the holographic principle, we live in an hologram, and so on, okay? Or even Matrix is built on a very, very intertwined narrative, genial connection between Platonism and such kind of things. This is Cartesianism, Calderón de la Barca, even in part Don Quixote, and so on. That the claim that we have not a certain criterion to distinguish what is image and what is being. Okay? We have not the certainty to think ourselves as living in the real world, but we can also think ourselves as living in an illusion. Okay? But that is metaphysically oriented. Okay? And this metaphysical orientation comes from Plato. Because when it's matter to define the philosopher, Plato say, okay, better to define, to chase, to define, to hunt the sophist. Okay? And when we define the sophist, we can define the philosopher. At the end of the day, Plato, it's very difficult that Plato defines the sophist, but will never write a dialogue about the philosopher at all. So it's much difficult as you can think. What does the sophist, this is the public figure that eludes the city with argumentation without anchorage to the concrete being, is not to a certain criterion, produce images. Okay? By putting word in their ears, and there is the young people paying in order to be educated, and by showing them spoken images of everything, eidola legomena in Old Greek, so as to make them believe that the words are true and the person who's speaking to them is the wisest person that there is. Then you can find a wonderful commentary of the situation of the sophist in this book of Stanley Rosen, Plato's Sophist, The Drama, and the title is very speaking for us, The Drama of the Original and Image. Okay? So, after having distinguished almost ontologically image and being, or the image and reality, Plato distinguishes, and that is important for us for the epistemology of modeling, okay? Distinguishes by two arts of imitation. Okay? So, okay, there is a producing images, but this production bifurcate in two different kinds. For imitation can be faithful and preserve such things as correct proportion and proper coloring. There is a sort of imitation, producing images as imitation, okay, a copy. The task then is to analyze that the feature of sophistry that distinguishes it from faithful imitation in a such way that explains its alleged faithlessness, and is the task that stranger, this is the main figures of the sophist, now turns his attention to. In the passage from X and Y, the stranger elaborates on the nature of the product of sophistry, which he had earlier characterized as images, okay? Eidola, we mentioned eidola legomena, or legomena, so if it's matter of read something by words, creating a mental image is the same thing. I have not to sketch an image, okay? For this reason, Plato speaks about eidola legomena. Even an argumentation can create an eidolon legomenon, okay? A depicted images, deforming this time and not copying the reality. And appearances, phantasmata, respectively appearance-making kind. We have two kind of technique. Art is technique. We have a mimetique, art, mimetic technique, giving copies or adherent copies of reality, and given a sort of appearance making images, this is the fantastique technique. That is, creating something like in fantasy, okay? Dragons, centaurs, and so on, and the conspiracy. You know, you can also go to many ideological fake. If you know Umberto Eco, this is one of the most known and genial semiologists of our time. Is dead, and they write. He wrote a book on the name of the rose. Of course, that's nothing to do with images or with fake conspiracy theory, but the Cemetery of Prague is the book. Knowing how fake documents can inspire conspiracy theory, conspirationism, and so on, anti-Zionism, and so on, and so on, you know? So it's not just a matter of picture painting or representing by dance, like in illusions, and so on, but also by writing is the same thing, or by arguing is the same thing. So our metaphysical, what they say, because I follow Kant in this, that is metaphysics is sort of natural trend or the natural disposition of man. In our inner metaphysics, we are used to distinguish from one side, being as truth from image that is illusion, and in this working on illusion or on images, we distinguish copying or creating fantasies. Okay? That's what is, and that brings, or that did bring, the whole history of Western philosophy. At least I will not say something about Indian philosophy or Chinese philosophy. But the distinction between theory and illusion is very, very important also in Buddhism and in other Eastern issues or spirituality, even in Hinduism, I think, if I could remember. So brings at last in the history of Western culture and then in Western science and philosophy of modernity a very deep distinction between ontology and imagination, what we talked last day about. It's also, it's not so radical, but it's also the case for Descartes. Why? Why the whole metaphysical meditation for Descartes are a way to give beyond the appearance of mental images, okay? Because the world, according to Calderón de la Barca, can, or life can be a dream, the matrix effect, okay? In order to reach a fixed ontology by clear idea that brings to the grasping of being what really is, and to grounding metaphysically and ontology science. Sorry for this brutal resume, but when the mechanism or when the opposition breaks in a certain way, is by critical thinking. That is by Immanuel Kant. Okay? I will not mention, it's not working, but anyway, I will not mention the importance of imagination in the constitution of phenomenality in the Critique of Pure Reason, okay? The theory of schematism, because the schematism or transcendental schematism is a very, very hard stuff. It was my PhD, and I can assure you that this is very, very hard stuff, even to display, okay? But pure imagination, firstly, in the Critique of Pure Reason, and then freie Spiel, this is free interplay or free play between understanding and imagination, lies for Kant as the first time, he would say, after Plato, radically at the ground of our knowledge of the world. Not by chance, by Kant, we have a reduction, I quote the analytical of principle, a reduction of I try to translate automatically from German, from the noble name of ontology, the berühmte Name Ontologie, to an analytic of our understanding. I will not say this it's our case, but anyway, just by putting outside the traditional metaphysical claim, we can become aware of the fact that imagination and science are very more linked, as we presume, in a metaphysical way. Okay? I quote Angela Breitenbach. There is not the one, is not the first to claim that. There's a long tradition of studies about Kant imagination and about the critique of judgment. They presume that since the 70s or even the 60s of the last century. Okay, imaginative reflect through free play between imagination and understanding. We are on analytic of judgment of beauty. You can say, what has to do beauty with science? Because the critique of pure judgment is not only a theories on beauty and aesthetics, it's a theory of science. Not by chance, at the end, we will discover a dimension in the critique of teleological judgment. There is an epistemic dimension where the complex things that has been chased from the domain of Newtonian science come back in order to open the science of the free romantic and the science of nature, then taken into account also by Goethe and by the Romantics, and so on and so on. So, through the free play between imagination and understanding, happening by contemplating the beauty, okay, or give sense to something fine or wonderful or sublime. Sublime is another case, but I will not approach sublime. And please don't ask me about Kant because we will stay here for hours and hours. The subject discovers reason's need to find meaning. And there is my good friend, a very, very important Kantian scholar, this is Alfredo Ferrarin, The Powers of Reason, Kant and the Idea of Cosmic Philosophy, published by University of Chicago Press. Okay? A meaning, the subject discover reason's need to find meaning. Okay? Sinn. A meaning that seems to be satisfied and returned by nature finalistic object. That is the beautiful object. Angela Breitenbach, imaginative reflection in aesthetic, judgment, and cognition, says, and in another essays, from earlier on the imagination in experience of beauty and achievements of understanding, according to Angela Breitenbach, but not only, the reflection of the imagination of aesthetic experience also plays an important function in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. This is a lesson of one of my master in Italy, Emilio Garroni. My unfilled account of imagination is important implication. It sheds light by commenting Kant, of course. It sheds light on two puzzling phenomena, the aesthetics, of science and the cognitive value of art, show that there is a common core beyond metaphysics or beyond ontotheology, common core of imaginative activity that contributes to an important type of aesthetic experience and to the unification of cognitions necessary for understanding. I do suggest that there is an expected connection between the mental activities involved in aesthetic judgment and those that lead to determinate cognition, the same kind of imaginative reflection that grounds aesthetic judgment also form a part of the search to cognition or the search for knowledge or for meaning by knowledge. I can just send to another systematic article, a paper of mine, if you will, I can send, it's not on the drive. From aesthetic to symbolic structures and back, the virtuous circle between art and science, that approach that more systematically, and also to Alfredo Ferrarin in relation to Kant. So, now we know that there is a sort of, we know even by reconsidering what we said about perspective and Descartes, optics in the modern term, that art and science is not so separated, and that there lies as at the core of our perception, or the even stabile perception of reality, something coming from an imaginative process. Okay? There is no longer a scandal. By working, for example, in phenomenology, Husserl speaks about a double horizon of our experience. Already a double horizon breaks with the naivety of the perceptual field. Okay? Every experience, and that is very, very topological, intricate. There is not everything, not every subject, but every experience as a sort of twofold horizon. An inner horizon, what is impossible for the chair, if we consider the chair ontologically, okay? And an other horizon, okay? The other horizon is the themes of the same kind that encompass us. But what is the other horizon? The chair is not empty, okay? What is the other horizon of our material perceptual experience of the chair? We cannot watch the atoms. It's sort of a space of further experience, or the more detailed, more granular experience of the same perceptual thing, okay, that improve a sort of continuity of our experience of the thing itself, okay? So even, I will not just bring Husserl as a dogma, but even our loudest experience of a material thing entail, if we take carefully to analyze our experience for it, epistemic or not, an intertwining of two different spaces. We have to imagine it, because if we take the chair as a thing in itself in an old ontological way, there is no inner space of the chair. Okay? So there is a sort of imagination building our experience of the world, structuring our world, perspectivally, multi-perspectivally, and so on and so on. So for us now, the rule or the intimate core that brings together art and science is no longer a scandal, like for Plato. For Plato was a sort of cultural scandal. not just as a philosophical one, a civilizational shock, okay, cannot be distinguished, but have to distinguish between real and images, okay? For us, now, there is no longer a scandal, so that we have a sort of very rich literature on epistemology of modeling, because we know that the model, even it is not a copy of the same nature of a copy, or is the same nature of an imaginative product, okay? But it's not a sort of deny to access to the things in itself. It's a sort of implementation of the access to itself, okay? In a recent book, a close friend and great philosopher, Alexander Schnell, named it The Philosophy of Black Mirror, you can find it in English, brings together the analysis of the series, what I don't know anything about, and, for example, many theses about Fichte build theory of images that pursues in a more, in my view, too strongest speculative way, but in a more decisive and clear way, what Kant showed already, okay? That imagination and build in sense of construction, okay, is at the core of our epistemic, but also non-epistemic approach to the world. Because that opens new frames in which we can experience the novelty of the world. Okay? Not by chance, models in science are not imagined, or it can be built, but are built. If I have a scientist, if I'm a mathematician, if I'm an ecologist, if I am whatever else, whoever else, I build with my colleague in a very, very lucid session or a series of sessions a model, and not something that I become when I dream. It's a sort of very concrete, if you will, activity to open the access to new kind of phenomena, or to bring new observed phenomena to the stability needed in order to grasp them better and more granular. Okay? So I just give the first entry that you can access also freely. Stefan Hartmann, Robert Frigg, Model in Science, Stanford Encyclopedia for Philosophy. Here is the link. Alex Gelfert, How to Do Science with Models, a philosophical primer. Stefan Hartmann, Modelle, but this is in Encyclopädie der Philosophie, this is in German. And then that very, very good article, Model-Based Reasoning, Science, Technology, and Values. And this very, very good book that I have in my drive, if you will, Model and Simulation in the Historical Emergence of Science as Complexity. We approach, or that we come closer to complexity, of course. And then the thesis that I formulated already before, but it's in French, sorry, that is the complex feature or structure of a phenomenon or observed system appears only and constitutively through its modeling. It is not just an option, okay? If I observe something empirically or barely empirically, I cannot notice the complexity of the thing. For this reason, we have to do to negationism or nihilism about complexity science and a very different societal and epistemical layer. And for this reason, we have to implement, if you will, the discourse, the epistemical discourse about complexity in philosophy of science and theory of knowledge to a maximal first philosophy approach. So, if I experience something, I can, in the best something complex, I can, in the worst case, experience that I do not understand nothing what is happening. What is the disorientation that we mentioned at the beginning, okay? It's a sort of negative experience. I experience barely that I cannot understand what's happening, okay? In the best case, we experience that is difficult to understand or that is complicated. That is, I need a certain process to unfold it. But in the case of the intertwining of dimension, and then we will see tomorrow of ontologies, of factors, of data, we cannot experience the complex without the model. Okay? We become just negative evidence, but we cannot grasp. And this idea of grasping by the model lies at the core of the opposition between two different approaches to modeling in science, and in particular complexity. Okay? The first is the fictional approach. That is, the model is just a copy of the real. Then can come the people say, what is the real, or where is the real? Okay? So I'm not very sympathetic with it, because it's sort of heritage of metaphysics, why we think and we must think beyond such metaphysic presupposition. So the fictional approach, if you will, is a sort of heritage. We had to discuss it. Is a sort of heritage of the distinction already made by Plato. Okay, distinction between mimetike and fantastike, techne. Okay? Then we have, in order to better understand what it means to grasp something, the artifactualist view. This is by saying that models are not just pictures of the world, but they are tools in order to handle something. And then give more concreteness to the whole context of building models in order to grasp something. Okay?
So is the artifactual view the same thing as hacking is representing and intervening?
Nearer, what they say. Nearer to hacking. So the mankind in different contexts build model ontologies or shapes ontologies in order to better grasp the world in which they live. That is sort of tools. Okay. Can you just turn the camera here? Because it's in which there is a white blackboard. So, and then you have for that many issues, among which I would suggest this, that is polemic and propositive at the same time. Scientific models are not fiction. Model-based science as epistemic warfare. Okay? So, let's sketch or the outline. We are in the second part, in the third part now, a brief survey of epistemology of modeling, but you can also notice the whole ontological background that lies coping with it. The models are indispensable in the field of complexity research. This is not an option. In its epistemological function in several respects, there is an essential difference between fiction and simulation, as between copy or image and model, okay? If I simulate something by a computer, there is no a free fantasy like in fiction, okay? There are constraints given by something that we will explore after. And thus between two essential procedures of gaining knowledge about complex phenomena through its modeling. And then there is a modular link, a sort of elastic relation, between theory and modeling on the one hand, there is a model validation, and the modeling and empirical testing, there is model verification. And the split, if you will, give more concreteness to the thing. Is not the nerd, I like the nerds, I'm also too. The nerds thinking about imaginary space in his room that give rise to a model. Is a community that discuss, like the standard model in quantum mechanics, is a huge community that discuss how the model can express at the best the theory, it can be implemented by experimental feature. Yeah?
Can we say that model is basically manifestation of form and theory is its grounding on the
Laws.
yeah.
So
And
that is there is a distinction in the model theory in mathematics. This is models are not the unique expression of the theory, sort of already particularization of the theory.
yes, I'm saying, can models be called manifestations of form?
Of more the yes, what they say are more concrete forms as the general types occurring in the laws. It's just going a step down and give shape to what the theory says in an almost general way.
And that's more like theory it is a nexus between form and theory which gives the real like the problem set or the system which we are trying to model. It gives a proper image with the combination of form and text, or form and equation.
For example, a model of a physical theory is still made of equations. There is not a sort of change of the stylistical register. For example, I have a theory in mind, and then I translate the theory in picture.
Yes.
No, that is not the case, because in this case, it will be belonging to fantasy. Yeah? Or to fantasy, or to imagine. Yeah?
No, if you finish with that, I just wanted to come back to this distinction between fiction and simulation.
Yeah.
Right? A simulation at one level is theoretically a framing within as if, right? But fiction is also not pure fantasy, right?
No. Fiction is. What is the problem? What is the pure fantasy?
Is it? I mean, because fiction is always framed within a certain convention, within certain rules.
For a certain fictional frame, you can say yes, yes or not. But anyway, fiction is not fantasy. This is even the fictionalist approach. The fictionalist approach in epistemology don't say that the models are just fantastical invention, something belonging to science. That is, I have to manage how to figure out something. Fictions are ficta, that is, how to figure out something, okay? And not as a tool, you know, that remains at the level of discursivity and not of practicity. Okay? For this reason, I give just a survey of epistemology of modeling in relation to complexity, because there are many exceptions of model and science. Okay? Model theory in mathematics, there is not the same thing as the modeling in science that has to do with an externality, for example. But you can still remain at this idea that I just figure out something without conceiving the model as a concrete tool. When we shift to the artifactualistic view, we go to the practicity and the shared practicity of science. There's now modeling science and modeling complexity science are made for clusters of teams, and there is a sort of very concrete discussion, and pragmatically oriented, of course, between what the model is, or what the model let us think as pattern, not just included in the theory, but more concrete oriented to reality, and the theory itself. For this reason, the process, the process, and this is a communitary one, it is not a simple one. The process of model validation is what links the theory and the model. Because the model must be validated. It is not sort of analytical, explicit making. I make it explicit a theory. No, a theory can be made explicit by many ways of models. The model validation is the practice by which the scientific community in an open space, not just my fantasy, not just my imagination, in order to quote a song from Camberis, validate the pertinency and the consistency of the model in regard to the coherence of the theory, but also to the second step, that is, the relationship or the establishment of many relationships between modeling and empirical testing. So, if you will, we can overcome the simplistic view about models as images by, so we have theory, model, ontology. If you will, we can also translate very naively. We have concepts, image, and being. If we think in this way, by reducing the theory to a sum of concepts, the model to a sort of pictorial figuring one, and the ontology to the form of concrete being, we can say that it's just an image, just an imagination, okay? And then we become to negationist or nihilist point of view, okay? Just an image, just a diaphragm, even opaque diaphragm that is more bad than good for our approach to reality. Let's be realist. What exists is what we see, without diaphragm, seemingly. But when we as is to do in science, we enlarge the field of our inquiry. We have theories, we have models established by a large activity of model validation, by which, not by an individuum, but by a community, and the same things appears when we have the relation between validated models and empirical testing. So if you sit in climatology groups and so on from climatologists, so where you have to place the captors, where you have to place at which frequency you have to establish some empirical thing, instruments or tool, is not something that goes per se. The people are always in agreement, okay? There is a communitary discussion in order to reach what precisely? What fit at the best with the need to catching something in the best way possible, you know? So this way, in my view, but just is and by bringing intersubjectivity in it, is the one way to stabilize the very fragile relation between theory, model, and ontology, not only from a scientific point of view. Why? Because instead we fall always in this superstition that the theory is a sum of concepts, that the model is an image, and that the ontology is a being. Yeah?
So suppose I were to take a theory from particle physics or string theory, right, that you could have a theory which unifies all the four interactions of nature in 501 dimensions. Then
501. Why the one?
511 odd dimensions.
Okay.
All right?
This is a superstring theory.
There are such
Superstring. No, this is I can.
so where does the ontology
There was 8 dimension by coupling differently that gives such number. But anyway, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
suppose that.
Yeah, suppose that. So where does the ontology stand?
The ontology?
Yeah.
There is the old alternative between quantum gravity and superstring theory. It's just not a sort of imagination. Then you have to establish, like for the standard model, if you will, establish an experiment in order to prove it. That is the common. It was at the chair. I was at the chair twice, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And beyond the technology and the marvelous things that you can see, the best thing to say is the human common adventure. That the people before, that is in the theoretical physics, try to find a standard model, a best fitting model to what they have to discover or to have to better understand. But then there is a huge dialogue world around on the testing, that is on the model verification, even when you collect data by the experiments. So when the LHC collected the data, then for this reason that was internet created, I send it to all the universe, and the people discuss by paper and so on and so on. There is not a single man perceiving the thing. So we can have the model that you have beyond the Planck wall. So we have even to imagine how to imagine an experiment in order to catch it. But anyway, it's a very, very good example, because you can have a model, but the model must then be verified. There is this very, very large spectrum of options between the model itself that is validated as expressing in the best way the theory from the point of view of what we will know, and the empirical testing. That is what, if you transform this very Husserlian theme, not only experience, but science is the intersubjectivity of sharing. Not sharing dogma, sharing a work, because we have to do in an artifactualistic view, because the models can be considered as artifacts, okay? And just in this case, I can say there is not just an imagination. If the people say to me, consider a very, very high dimension space, 7 dimension, 15 dimension, and then imagine, or figure out, or imagine, let's say imagine a ball rolling down the landscape creates by, etc., etc. It's not something that this scientists come, maybe the genius, these scientists come to say, and then everybody accept, well, because it's fine, it's genius. It's something elaborated, okay? We have a model with 17 dimensions, not because this is a mentulum canis or that the libitum, we decide, okay, 17, we like 17. Okay, no, because the need to catch better and more granular what we have to know oriented the community beyond the idea, this is very fanatical, of an absolute truth. That 17 dimension, or the model built on 17 dimension, fitting with procedure of empirical testing, is better than 15, but is very worse than 19, like the dimension of superstring theory, for example. Okay? There is no subjectivity inside, not in certain, we are men that experience, but there is no personal willingness to do something instead of something other. Okay? So the negationist can negate alone per se. The scientist must work with other in order to show. That is the difference between negation or negationism and positive construction that we have to do. Okay? So just in order to become to the next level, okay? Then the level of empirical testing cannot just be the end of my theory, because I can also make the option in consideration of the complexity of the thing, not just to make an empirical testing, because an empirical testing say nothing, or in a non-deterministic way can say nothing about the future, but also to simulate what happens. And then we have the implementation between modeling and simulation. But even in this way, simulation, not something made by fantasy, something made by machines, ruling by certain algorithms. Okay? So if I implement a model to a computing machine, a very, very powerful computing machine, it's not like to simulate something with your fantasy. Okay? Something needed in order to anticipate different things that can happen coming from what we see yesterday. But anyway, let's go carefully. What are and what do models in complexity research, such as climatic or economic models, predict? Okay? How does modeling unite with or the copy with computer simulation? Let's take the example that we mentioned at the beginning. I have a model, and this model is made up on 15 dimensions, okay? Creates to me a landscape, that is the surface on which the ball can run. But if you throw the ball in a non-linear space, the ball can take sensitive to the initial condition, like the pendulum, many different directions. Okay? So it's very coherent, if you will, with what we said yesterday. If there is a sensitiveness to initial condition, okay? If I throw the ball, my funny ball, on the landscape, this imaginary or ideal landscape, can happen many things. A little stone, a little thing, a little position, 1 micrometer of position can determine otherwise the behavior. And if I have to figure out what is happening with all those data, I need machines to simulate. Okay? That is why simulation is often needed. Yes?
So I'm trying to simplify it for myself, what you just said, and it makes sense also this time. The engagement of the system with a model for a positive system or a positive model, as we say.
No, we spoke about theory.
Yeah, but not through negation, through
Yeah.
the method of community and refutation, all that. That it has to have a dynamical system of information exchange between the model and the system that we're trying to model. This is what
Can you repeat, please?
there has to be a constant dynamical exchange of information.
Between what?
Model and the system that we are trying to model.
Yes.
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 That is what I was asking. Like.
That is the level of empirical testing.
Yes.
For example, no, it's very, very right. For example, is not say that in a bifurcate climate or ecosystem, what we would kept by our initial empirical testing is salient after the bifurcation. We have to rediscuss in which direction we have to set our captors. There is a sort of for this reason we need a community. There is not the science made on the desk or that simply made on the desk. Okay? There is emergent phenomena can bring us to rediscuss the model, to rediscuss its empirical test, not to discuss the empirical testing of the model, because something is happening for which our empirical testers are not able to test. And then that implies another large discussion of the model validation, because we set the test in coherence with the validated model. We sort of go and back activity, standing activity between the realm and the theory. There is no sort of just a link you can cut and then by negation. But we was in need, just in order to approach the minimal way to refute the negationism about climate change, 6 lectures of this higher complexity, just in order to do how it's difficult to refute the negationists on such political things, okay? Or let's say another thing, the fear of Europe, With the desertification, and there was in December of COP16, in my view, in Riyadh, talking about that, with the huge acceleration of desertification, not only of Sahara area, but even of Mediterranean area. That is a fact given by climatologists, of the desert climatologists, and so on and so on. Just consider that in the South Italy, there's a still relatively green. The increase of desertification is 60%. The increase of desertification. It does not mean that desert will be every year 60% larger. You can, coping with ecological models of migrations, foresee that in many years they are not just, this is so tragic to say, 100,000 people migrating for this coast of North Africa to Europe, dying oftenly forgotten by our very, very right and pious civilization on the sea. You know that the Middle Sea has become a sort of cemetery. But they will come at millions, okay? There is not something that the people say that in order to fear the rich, protected society of Europe, in order to anticipate what it will be, this war, massacres, and so on, that to build in before cooperation, to build in before hospitality, and so on. You know, it's not something that the people say in order to fear the population. It's something that comes from model or from copying of model. Of course, the models can be wrong for a certain degree, okay? But not on every spectrum. It could be 5 million of migrating people, it could be 50 million, but anyway, in the lower rate is a very huge change from geopolitical point of view, okay? So this constant exchange between modelists and theorists and between theory in order to establish the more fitting model in order then to simulate it is what is, in my view, the new dimension of science. What secure, if you will, scientific statements, not by dogmatism, but by facts. Okay? So the simulation, in order to come back, helps because the system is a system sensible like the climate to the butterfly, to sensitive condition, just to imagine all or most possible direction or trajectory that the tiny ball can take in this landscape. Okay? Simulate, this is a sort of algorithmically simulated things. This is necessary because we cannot handle with our paper with data, but it's sort of step towards the verification itself. So modeling or simulation with computer plays an essential role in complexity research because we have to do with things that we cannot handle with our hands and we cannot foresee just by imagination. There is not such a thing. We don't imagine what will happen in a complex system. Yeah, we are very expert scientists in climatology foresees what can happen, but foreseeing intuitively is not proof, okay? Then we need simulations. And they sketch 4 epistemological aspects of modeling, the link between complexity, simulation, and probability. We said also yesterday and before yesterday by entry of thermodynamics and entropy in a non-deterministic, this is the manifestation of a non-fully deterministic world, probabilism is a matter of science. We have a science for it. The notion of scenario in this central role in complexity research. For example, if you take the EPCC manifesto, the EPCC report, okay, and the climatologists present very different scenarios obtained by simulation that put forward empirically stated model. They are being validated among the theory. There is not a scenario that they sketch like when I do a murales, okay? Even people that do good murales, wall painting, are very, very carefully and methodically. But anyway, you know, it's something that the most part of community agreeing, when the people present a scenario, it's not just a fair tale of what could be, just another thing. I present a scenario. It's not a scenario like in theater, okay? The scenarist. It's not just a scene. It's another things. And now we miss the things, or we are in the constant risk to associate to the word the wrong thing. Climatologists present us 3 scenarios. Okay? Scenarios are not fair tale because they are obtained in this way. Huh? It's just a bit different. There is no sort of ecologist, green climatologist that will impeach the industry and the world growth that comes to the EPCC and say, oh, there is a catastrophic scenario. There is not. They tell us, the lobbyists tell us that it's in this way, but it's not in this way that works. Okay? The scenario has an epistemic consistency, even the optimistic. Okay? Even the optimistic, although the less pessimistic. Okay? There is sort of process of sedimentation, long process of sedimentation of the adoption of scenarios or not. And these scenarios are not made by novelists, are made by computers, so that are nothing to do with climate change, for example, or mass migrations, okay, to which they compute by implementing what the model say to compute. With the data we had empirically collected. Okay? So, a complex world is not a world of hallucinations. Okay? It's not the chaos in which the individuum can stay or sit on the table and outside there is a sort of world of phantasms. Okay? It's not the not understanding. It's the understanding otherwise. But understanding otherwise need to have some patterns in order to structure this understanding. So, the role of modeling in science of complex expands when we move to computer simulation, where the model serves only as a first step to accelerate and facilitate the computational task of modeling, but not exhaust the computational task of modeling. There is no model today without simulation. It's just an empirical screenshot of the state that not serves to validate or to even empirically confirm the model. Such a step of computer modeling opens access to model that, due to their structure, are capable of describing the behavior of the system in multiple possible, ontological, organizational dimension, or layers. For it is only within the landscape of computer simulation practice that one can perceive as scientifically describe the content of system or systemic complexity. For this reason, the models and simulation are necessary, indispensable to have a non-subjective, a non-arbitrary idea of what a complex world looks like. So, a fairy discourse or tale just remaining on philosophy brings to the objection that is just a speculation. If I had to introduce you to a complex world, the complexity of our world, or to our world today, simply as the task of philosophy, just by doing commentaries on previous authors, the first scientist, the first negationist, the first priest can come and say, it's just your opinion. That's the problem. So let's make something that goes more in our ontological problematic, okay? Models in complexity science, because we mentioned at the beginning the fifth of 17 dimension. We have already been used become familiar to this idea of many dimensionality since 3-4 lectures, okay? But now we will just define in the last 15 minutes remaining, but then we can discuss in the discussion what it is. How such idea of models in science and simulation in science, the manifold forms of modeling, has to do and depends from our capacity to think in a non-poetical point of view the multidimensionality. Okay? That is to, like Descartes, in another way, like Descartes, to introduce us to these imaginary spaces that are not fantasies, are strong construction, okay? Because the disorientation comes from two different factors, if you will, okay? Even empirically or existentially. One factor is the widening of our life horizon. I live in the valley X of India, I live in the small valley in Tuscany, I live in the small valley in Colorado, I don't know. I'm put in great metropolis like New Delhi, Bombay, Paris, or New York. My disorientation comes from the fact that my life horizon exploded and there is too many things that my brain cannot handle, okay? Another thing is the coming of new horizon, for example, of life. If you are a young man, your life is not easy, of course, but anyway, if you then become father or you become chef of a team, okay, the shock is given by the fact that you are not your dimension, that is not the dimension, I go in this dimension, in this direction, as young man is the unique dimension, but you have many other dimensions. So to think the world and to think the many dimensionality, even from an existential point of view, is strictly related. For example, intercultural studies have been approached like the melting of different horizons, okay? That is a very nice word, fusions or melting of horizon. But at a certain point, you have to be able to give shape to this thing. So the works on spatiality, as on temporality, but anyway, is strictly related to our ontological approach to the world, okay? As we've seen by perspective, by changing the space, change also our being in the space as being in the world. Or the change of the world implies that we change our idea of space in order to inhabit better the world itself. So many forms of modeling entailing many forms of spatiality. Let's ask the question, what kind of spatiality are involved? We also mentioned that, but we cannot understand. I just touched briefly in 10 minutes, but it's essential, because we cannot understand what is a butterfly effect. Okay? We cannot reach the core of the thing, so begin to grasp even better what is even the ontological problem of a complex world. Okay? So reach the level, or can figure out the level at which a first philosophy and ontology must take place in order to speak the word in terms of complexity, if you had not understand what is a phase space. And it's not too difficult to understand. Then to handle a bit more, but to understand. In physics, I quote a lexicon encyclopedia, phase space is a concept which unifies classical Hamiltonian, be not afraid from Hamiltonian. Hamiltonian is just the third better way in order to model gravitational theory and dynamics, and mechanics, okay? There is Newton, there is Lagrange, and then there is Hamilton. Hamilton lies as the better tools, though. The phase is a concept which unifies classical mechanics and quantum mechanics. In mathematics, phase is a concept which unifies symplectic geometry with harmonic analysis of partial derivative equation. Let's just take a second. In classical mechanics, the phase space is the space of all possible states of a physical system. Okay? Is a map. Is a map. But you don't trace the small butterfly, the object. You trace the state, the synetical state of the system. So if you make yourself able to know and to see, because we have a tractor, to see at which point the system is. It not means that the system locates itself. Okay? At the which point, what is the state of the system? Where are we when we discussing about this system? 3 corps, 2 corps, many corps interacting together, many chairs, and so on and so on. No matter what system is. By state, we do not simply mean the position Q of all the objects in the system. There is not a sort of cartography of the movement of the object. This makes no sense, because for many systems we are billions of objects. It will be sort of Pollock psychedelic painting, okay? Which will occupy physical space or configuration space. But also their velocities or momenta p, which will occupy momentum space, on the needs, both position and momentum of system in order to determine the future behavior of that system. Okay? It's a tool that gives us an information, the clear insight, what is the state of affairs of the system we are considering. Every system. And then we have to go back to Descartes, because it's Descartes that says us something like, by dimension, we understand nothing other than the modern reason according to which, etc., etc. Is the first way to break up our view to other dimension in which we can see not imaginary things, but the measurable state of the system. If you have a phase space and I have an attractor on a phase space, if the system is not complex, I can point a point on the line, on the shapes, and that's give information how much energy, how much loss of warmth. You can do also with a locomotive. So you can also have a phase space of the system as locomotive, or the system of electrical network, of the system of your internet connection, okay? This is another complex system. I point my finger on a point of the line, and I have the information I need. It's not speculation, okay? But with complex system, we have I shape this Wikipedia things about attractor, but the attractor is just the shapes in this diagram that gives us information of what we have to know, okay, of the state of the system. The problem is that we have not only attractors in a phase space that give us a clear information, that is a clear quantity. The dimension of any system can be mapped using the concept called phase space, also described by the space of the possible. For any system, the space of the possible is developed by identifying all the dimensions. For example, in our ecosystemic ball metaphor, the fifth dimension can identify the state of the system. There is, I have a ball, and either identify the position of the ball on this landscape, okay? And if I be able to do that, this identification, okay, the ball is at a certain time in this place of this landscape, give me information on the state of the system. Yeah?
Can we use the last example you used of double pendulum and the way we carted the possibilities of all the places it can be, and use one point as the reference point to map it? Like, can we say in case of double pendulum?
But this is not the trajectory of double pendulum is not an attractor.
Yeah, that is not the attractor. The attractor in that case would be the point from which it is connected.
Yes.
I'm trying to understand for myself.
No, the attractor has any forms that are not visible in the trajectory. They are not to fix the pendulum. If there is an attractor, it can point attractor, but the point attractor of a simple pendulum is not because the pendulum is anchored to a physical point.
Double pendulum?
No, double pendulum has no point attractor. No, we have also to do with an optical abstract thing, the double pendulum, and then the attractor cannot be seen everywhere, even of a pendulum, okay? Because modelize or to put together things that it cannot be catched empirical in the sense of our perception. That is not optical, okay? The space of the possible is then represented in either graphical tabular form. In natural science, the prevalence of time series data means that the phase space can be represented as a graphical map of all the relevant dimensions and their values. On that you have forms of attractor, and then you have the last two or the last three that are attractors some way linked to complexity. If I put, is very empirical to do, okay? If I put my laser on this point, okay, or on this value, imagine that here you have two Cartesian axes, okay? If the x over time is 3 minutes, okay? And you go to the vertical, I don't meet just one point. I meet many points. That is the complexity of the state of the system. The system at this moment can find itself as a general state in many points. Okay? That is, can behave bifurcated before. Huh? For this reason, thinking in terms of imaginary spaces and then reach the idea of many dimensionality, phase space, attractor is not something that helps just in order to do science. It's something that helps in order, like narrative spaces or mythologies and so on. I will not exclude, or artistic, but it's something that helps to see beyond. Okay? If you watch the Venus of Milo or if you watch a mandala in Tibetan art, or if you reflect, if you know what a mandala is, if you make the experience, or if you contemplate the Venus of Milo by knowing what it represents, you see beyond. But it's not a beyond that is in our phantasms that can be dreamed. It's a beyond that constitutes reality. And especially in this case, imaginary spaces. So, spaces that people not used to hear about knowledge. I will not talk about science, about knowledge. Can consider imaginary. And denying it as real, open our view on a better access to the real. So if I present the butterfly effect, because it's used, if you talk with ecologists, this is people oriented to ecology, to sustainable development, okay? And you talk about this nature of the butterfly, the people are completely disoriented because they think that the butterfly is the butterfly and the state of the climate is what we can see, but there is not climatology, there is just meteorology, okay? So in Rome, it falls snow less day or before yesterday as 40 years ago. I was there. It was one of the funniest moments of my childhood because Rome is relatively warm, so I have snow. I don't go to school. It was a privilege. So by intuition or meteorological things, it depends that the climate does not change. But it's a fake because you have to go beyond on the state. Let's take the climate. In the climatology, going by this space or having to implement that the empirical captures to this space are not meteorology. You know? Mass population analysis are not not sort of news of the data register who goes in which ways. Okay? Epidemiology made by networks is not simply medical care. Not because medical care is not important. It moves and it makes a statement. It shows, something in other dimension. And only in this dimension we can see clearly how the complex world manifests itself. It's just another kind of Platonical change of view, okay? Just updated with what we know. Okay? It does not mean that the world doesn't exist, that it's an illusion. No. It's that in order to catch the granularity of our complex world, we have to adapt the right tool. And the right tool are such things. Networks, many topologies, attractors, all the complex stuff that we discussed yesterday, many concepts interrelating, and so on. Instead, the word is simple. Our everyday life, money or not, rooms, spaces, families, and so on and so on. But it's a right understanding of the world. That is the thing. Then we will approach, Now we have 1 hour questions. Yeah? As usual, but it's happened for every course in every country of the world, I will transfer the next slides to tomorrow. But just in order to say, this is even a phase space, okay? When you say the climates bifurcate, it's not bifurcating outside. It's bifurcating because the phase space and the sort of exponent are the Lyapunov exponent shows that at a certain point, the system, that is the phase state, can go exponentially in many directions. So, not bifurcate because they split. They split nowhere. Okay, break. Come.
Yesterday, I had a question from yesterday from
Yeah.
what was quoted in the video. Complexity is non-linear. So, why the basic computational paradigm has a linear foundation? In the slide that you showed yesterday, video.
In the tutorial.
Yeah. There
Yeah,
was a-
non-linear science. Yeah.
Complexity is a non-linear science. Still, to map a complex system, they further said that we use. I have the screenshots also. Wait, I'll explain the question. It was something that I wanted to ask but couldn't. So we use the linear programming of if, then, do. They showed
Yeah,
the
yeah.
screenshot also. So I took this. So the question was that how can you break a complex system through multiple linear systems or binary systems?
Yeah. Okay. There is a huge problem that interests us not only for what we say today or yesterday, but also what we say tomorrow. The problem is, I've already shortly mentioned, non-linear, it means not that there is no path of a system. It means that you have more than that. You have more possible path, and even you have more dimension on which you can identify a path. So, there is, in my view, not only an epistemic question, but also an ontological one. If we take together with some care, attention, both meanings of ontology in philosophical sense and ontology in computational sense. And what I search to do with infinite RHs in my life, that is to bring the ontology to a sufficient plasticity in order to can afford to handle the problem in both ways. The problem is not by chance. The problem is the frame in which you implement that. So it is a spatial frame in the sense that dimension can be coded also informatically, but you have to have a general view how to build a program that goes in different dimensions, that is able to catch up elements ruling on one dimension of computing and associating to this computing the data that goes with, and other computation, the rules on other dimensions. So you sort of meta-programming problem.
Because we currently use the binary system, 0 and 1, and somehow you cannot, with the current paradigm or the current computational system, you cannot create a dimension, at least add it to new abstraction values. Okay, I'll have to simplify it further. What we're currently doing with what you call gate system, electronic gates that we use to create the programs, 0 and 1, the combinations of this. As you said, that we cannot add more dimensions to it. We just simply can't. So can we think of a framework? Possibly, in theory, there is one through computation, quantum computing.
There is the task, but in any way, even if you perform it computationally, and this is reachable, there is either we have proxy function between many computer modules, many computing modules in the system, by associating ontologies, by proxying ontologies, copying ontologies. The problem is the problem is what general view you have on the result of your computing. So computing is very powerful, but the problem is the general view on what it is. That's many computer settled in interaction, even hyperbolical space that go faster and faster, and so on, give us results. It can compute. There is no problem. This is the wonder. But what you become, so what you put in the structuring of metacomputing or many computing together before, what you becomes from single procedures of computation belongs not to 0, 1.
Yes,
you have to translate.
Yeah, that is
You have to translate in other ontology, or transfer the result of computation to other ontologies, for which you don't have at the moment a global view. And in my view, this is just an hypothesis, but there is not. You have no complete structured meta-ontology in order to say for a computing performance how to locate it in a sort of general idea of object.
So you also said, I think in the previous lectures once, that the intuitionally or our instinct, through instincts, whatever that we are able to perceive, it has no limits, and it is possible in our perceptual wisdom that we can imagine these frameworks, but somehow we cannot yet ground it.
Somehow,
We cannot ground it, like we have no framework to write it, to save it, to transfer it.
No, that's you must repeat. I have not understand. The word, our tendency is to
we know there is a limit only because we have certain intellectual or certain capacity.
Limit of understanding.
Yeah, certain limit of understanding which supersedes our limit to manifest that knowledge into what is transferable. The metacognitive limit of humans to transfer all that we can sense and intuit about the reality, we cannot transfer and transmit or write or explain.
No, I didn't understand.
We don't have a nexus or a kind of system through which we can actually understand all that we are in terms of our ability to think beyond the framework.
No, it is no. I will not say that. We have the ability to think beyond the framework.
We have, but that is, I misphrased it. We have the ability to think, but we do not have the ability to put it into the framework that we have right now.
No. There is two different frameworks.
Yeah.
You cannot put statistical dynamics in determinism, or you cannot put quantum mechanics in the laws of continuity for the moment. But anyway, if you reach, like in quantum gravity or superstring theory, you reach a meta level wherein both are specification, you know? So the framework, the new framework opening itself. If you reach the unification, okay? For example, electromagnetism and gravitation are reached by Einstein. There are two different frameworks before, and then by special relativity, they become the specification of a more general framework, okay? But you cannot put one framework in one framework. You put both for this reason. Try to understand a complex world is a maximal task of rationality, because you have to enlarge so strongly your framework in order to can admit as the simple, or the simple as well as the complex, and not just to say the simple isn't the complex, everything is complex, not the simple, not the exists, or negate or be nihilist about complex and say, I can just handle with the simple, I put the complex in the simple and I reduce the complex to the simple. You know, you have to reach something so modular enough, but not just from epistemic point of view, even from philosophical point of view, we reach it. Every step in our knowledge consists in reaching new framework from which. The problem is that it is not said now, or till now, about, I will exclude as necessity, that there is, for every framework that you include in the new wide framework, there is possible passages, you know?
Yeah, there's no uniformity.
There is no, I will say, this is, and my claim is that a sort of growing of our mind and growing of our rationality is not longer being in the need to have unification. Unification in the sense of homogenization. So I will, in philosophical terms, I would say it is possible to have a sort of metaphysics or ontology of the complex. Maybe people say yes, but if you analyze the
You said in one of the lectures also that just because the mathematics reached its limit does not mean that we didn't have the discoveries. We had a lot of discoveries.
Yeah. So that is even to discover a new forms of, even Kant say the same for thinkings in itself, phenomenon, and then from phenomenality and knowledge and action and moral. If we discover negativities in our rationality, it means that if we discover that we can't go everywhere from every point in the horizon of our rationality, I don't think that it's a negative issues of our metaphysical tendency to bring all together, but it's not a negative issues for rationality. We made anyway a step forwards.
But then, very moment you start talking about it, it becomes more of a discourse of will. Free will.
That is more far from what we say. What we will. So will to unify, or will as
the
practical.
Very moment we have a reason for negativity of our reasoning or ability, agency to reason, then we are superseding our own ability to critique the only framework that we have for our
Yeah.
existence. So doesn't that make it a free will sort of debate? I'm going into the metaphysical side, of course, of the debate.
Free will of what?
Okay, so the discourse is like via negative. You're saying that if we start looking at rationality, the agency that our cognitive agency that we have through which we are able to connect these frameworks to make a system through which we can understand the reality or the truth. The very moment we have another cognitive ability that can question our rationality itself, wouldn't that make us somehow like
More free?
Yeah.
Yes, yes, it's liberate from sort of limitation given by the naivety of our holism, in order to say.
That was what I was saying.
So, for example, that's a very stupid example, a very idiot example. By becoming father, you realize that you cannot push to the top your careerism or to will to make career because there are another needs going in another way. So both at the maximum is impossible. Okay? That is a limitation. But become aware that you cannot do wrong by pursuing a family life and then expecting that you have a huge career that you was expecting for. I don't know, it's not my case. But anyway, by reaching the awareness that you can do both of the top, that your forces, even given the best, distribute themselves in two different axes, they cannot converge. That is not a limitation of free will, is a sort of amplification of your potentialities.
So
The problem is the free will is a very ideal, is not capacity to act free, Because becoming, for example, I would like remain in India for 3 months and rise to India. Okay, I'm free to do it. But if I don't remain to India, it's because I become aware that my life runs not only at one dimension, what I will in order to experience alone and so on, but I have other constraints, other stuff, and so on and so on. For example, it is just one thing in order to bring us to the theme itself, okay, to the topic. Let's take the yesterday's speech about homogenization or absolutely free openness and so on and so on, or let's take even ecology. Radical purist ecologists, okay, say let's stop everything and pursue a sort of originary unity and with nature, okay? So, from the point of view of your life, you can be able to do. You go to the country, you establish just a little farm, if you have money and possibility and so on, and you can live in coherence with nature. If you take it from the point of view of societies, of complex society, expect that from a high industrialized society that cannot stop, they don't will, and they cannot stop from the moment to another, like a nuclear central, okay? Is not a free will, is a sort of utopistic thing. So the awareness that you can expect that in one dimension, your private life, or your life of your community, and so on, is one thing. But it's not a limitation of your free will. It's sort of capacity to locate your free action in the pertaining context.
So, whenever the conversation on complexity happens, the problem that we are facing right now, at least I am facing right now, is that a larger part of the discourse or the meditation that we get into moves away from the functional part and into the fictional, as you call it, the fictional domain.
To fictional?
Fictional as in the imaginary part. It has a lot to do with the parts where we have no framework, no system to deal with the problem.
No, now we have, but for you.
We have. No, I'm pointing out my mind's kind of the way I've trained so far. So, what are the kinds of books that you'd actually suggest to people to go forward to understand what are the workable problems within the system?
Maybe we can make the session on it.
Yeah, that's
So I already mentioned the first things in order to get into is the book I uploaded. This is Unsimple Truths. Then they are the two books I brought yesterday. There is What is a Complex System?
what is a complex system and
Already a
Order
bit,
of-
even if you skip the mathematical parts, is more informed. And then for people that will improve that with more complex mathematical tools, complexity, a brief survey. Is that book. So, is that book. So, firstly, Unsimple Truths, okay? It's very, very, not easy, but it's very, very plain, well written, and so on, and so on. Then you have these two, this first, this second, because this is a mathematician, informatician, and ask from the reader more than those two people. And then you can step into the philosophy of complex system. There is 700. And when you're at the 10 and you're already meditated, we will become my new book that I'm writing. So that's just a joke. But anyway, you have enough time to meditate because those books entail so many references and so many things to know that you will spend many times on it. So first, Unsimple Truths. Thank you for the question. Second, what is a complex system? And then, for mathematically more experienced people, complexity as guided tool. Or if you have two difficulties with it, you can step from this to the philosophy of complex system. You have all the handbook. You can first read carefully and reread the introduction, and then explore all the dimensions that they are inside.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. What you were talking about right now, I mean, you were talking about free will and how something, if we can't reach it actually, that doesn't become a problem for us to kind of maybe exert our energies in different directions. I mean, for example, if we talk about Kant's phenomena and nominal realm.
Yeah.
So,
but there is not a sort of be weaker of our reason.
That's fine. But my question is like, for example, when you say that we can't reach nomina, we can't know the thing in itself.
Slowly.
So, okay, sorry. So, but we can understand the phenomenal reality, maybe the things as they appear to us. But the point would be, if we relate it to mathematics or even philosophy per se, don't you think that we have to redefine mathematics or philosophy in terms that, for example, if philosophy has no telos, again, not saying that we know where we are going, but the thing is that we know that we are trying to find something, maybe some reality, even if it's complex for that matter, and same in mathematics. But when we say that there is something we can't reach, so let's just maybe research or do things, I would say, in the horizontal directions. But let us stop talking about the telos.
Just stop. It's too many things. So let's stay for the moment as the philosophy and teleology or theology?
I'm talking about telos. I would say teleological thinking
Yeah,
of something. For
the problem is I'm not to discard the teleology of philosophy at once, but even to become aware that there are no linear teleologies as a sort of continuous increase of rationality and continuous approximation to the truth will be already a great step forward. So, okay, there is a sort of telos moving our activity, and there is an inner telos of philosophy, but that this telos be sort of linear progress, I will discard it as presupposition.
Okay.
Maybe philosophy must go in different ways in order to reorient itself, and so on and so on.
So,
It's not straight to the goal. Okay.
I understand, yes. So,
There is a very, very, very inadapted way to conceive philosophy, even naive, if you will. It's a sort of positivistic way.
is it the same for mathematics and other sciences? I would say.
Yeah, but mathematics, after of course, mathematics, after the foundation of science, the practical mathematics has always been rhizomatic, as we said yesterday. The philosophical idea of mathematics as oriented to the goal to explain what are number and why from the concept of quantity derives all the branch of mathematics has been abandoned definitively with the foundational crisis. Now the idea of mathematics is more local, and the mathematics become not weaker at all, even more stronger, more plastic.
There was this statement by a very famous scientist that we inherently don't know why 1 + 1 is equal to 2, yet it somehow magically works, and that is why it's mathematics.
But for example, as you were saying that there need not be linear progression. Okay, progression can be non-linear as well. So what?
No, there is no linear teleology as philosophy approximates itself to the truth.
So isn't that there this problem of, for example, when we what we call maybe relativism, when people talk about post-truth world, for example. So you say there are so maybe many truths, for example, but then again, how do we define the truth at all? Because if
No, the problem is to be able to question what is the question about truth, and not the demand about truth. This was the first steps up after the metaphysics or beyond the metaphysics. So before to ask the question, what is truth, you have to question what I'm demanding by the question, what is truth, and how the simple shape of my question entails metaphysical expectation that cannot be revealed by the answer. That is not dogmatic. That is more, I can assure you, you can also talk private, is a very, very hard process of maturation of your philosophical thinking. Because one thing, and you touch on an open wound, I don't say it myself on the video, but anyway, you touch on number one. So even from the question of being is the same thing. Now we know that, no, we know, even Aristotle, we will say tomorrow, was knowing clearly that the question of being is not answerable. But anyway, just in order to split the simple question that we take as pure theoretical, what is truth, okay, from the question, what we are demanding by asking what is truth, is a huge step in the direction of a radical philosophy about truth, and so on and so on, you know? Mm-hmm. So when you ask, not by chance, the first is in the question of truth, is catching a theological nature. who asked the first time the question about truth? Who asked for the first time, who occurs in the history of the word truth? For the first time, where occurs for the first time the question, what is truth? Not by the Greeks.
Is it Vedas? I don't know.
What?
don't
No,
know.
it is the process of Jesus. Pilatus asked to Jesus, what is truth? And he asked, I am the truth, the way, and the life. So, just by considering then, when you ask what is truth, you have in face of you something that is not pure philosophical. But in the background, you're asking in order to find authenticity, you have to find, I'm not sure that philosophy now can identify our demand for truth, authenticity, objectivity, and so on, with the question, what is truth? And I say to you, because I'm working on this phenomenon, the split between the quest or the demand about truth, authenticity, and so on, and the Frage nach Wahrheit, I think the question of truth itself. Because if you ask the question of truth, purely, you are omitting your background that brings you ontogenetically, as person, biographically, and phylogenetically, this is oriented by metaphysical tradition, what is truth? So what is truth? But it is not a question so pure and so not simple to ask as it look like.
It's not presuppositionless, as Husserl say. It's not presuppositionless, as Husserl would say. There are presuppositions, maybe some, when we ask this question.
Just by asking, not by answering.
Just by asking, that's what I'm saying. Just by asking the question.
Just by asking. So just to acknowledge what is the inner dynamic that you put aside by pretending to ask pure philosophical questions is a very, very good step in order to reach a sort of authentic philosophical dimension. Without teleology, without idea to approximation of truth, and so on and so on.
Is that possible? I mean,
What?
Even when, for example, affecting Husserlian reductions, when he talks about these things, still there is something like maybe even transcendental ego in Husserl. Is that, like, if we look at things from,
It's just, there is a...
so even if there is transcendental ego, can we say that even transcendental ego is presuppositionless when it tries to maybe understand things? I mean, what kinds of abstractions can be made in our own selves to understand things when we can say that, so now see, this is the ego and it is presuppositionless. And now when you look at things, for example, and try to make sense of truth, or the question you were just asking, maybe the demand for truth, how do we know that that's presuppositionless itself?
Moment. We go for in respect to our arguments, but we will nevertheless answer. The distinction we mentioned before between the position of a transcendental ego by Kant or by Cohen or Nathorp even, and the presupposition of a transcendental ego by Husserl are quite different, because the position of the transcendentality of the ego, and not of transcendental ego, or of the transcendentality of the first person perspective, is by Husserl a sort of working hypothesis. There is nothing substantial. Okay. What is make a step forwards? You know, there is no, you cannot find nowhere a transcendental ego by observing phenomenology. There is no something substantial, while by Kant is something between the psychological and the transcendental is not so clear.
But then the critique made by Jean-Paul Sartre of the transcendence of the ego by Husserl, when he says that consciousness is actually just nothing. There is when Husserl
yeah, but nothing understood.
like
Slowly louder.
Sorry. So I'm talking about the Jean-Paul Sartre's, his critique of transcendence of ego of Husserl. So when he says that, the book itself actually, Husserl's book, Jean-Paul Sartre.
Okay, but one thing is the transcendence. One other thing is the transcendentality.
So there is a book of Husserl, Transcendence of the Ego.
No, from Sartre, La transcendance de l'ego.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So he makes critique of Husserl in that book. Is that
Yeah.
correct? So what he says that there is no ego actually. It's consciousness. He reached the conclusion where he says that consciousness it is nothing actually, because it's only intentionality. There's nothing there. It's only maybe it has no substance actually to it. So when you are saying that Husserl's thesis of transcendental ego is only a working hypothesis, I don't see why would then Jean-Paul Sartre make this critique of Husserl, because then
this critique to Husserl is made on two things. The thing is motivated by Heidegger, and is motivated by a sort of very, very fresh reception of Husserl's transcendental turn. By reading the manuscript, the transcendence of the ego is already Husserlian, and the transcendentality of the ego by Husserl that was criticized by Sartre seems to be more as a working hypothesis, as a hypostasis.
Oh, coming from Heidegger actually.
Yeah, I think that is also existentially motivated.
Okay, thank you so much.
On mimesis, have you read the work of René Girard? Girard.
Yeah. You're reading it?
Yeah. Desire. You can take it. This was just a conversation.
Okay.
Because you used the term mimesis, so I asked. You used the word mimesis. Mimesis.
Mimesis.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's a long
so
history.
I asked Girard. He was a French.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So to come to Shaman's question about the limits of the complex system from a linguistic or Wittgensteinian perspective. So Wittgenstein at one point says die Grenzen meiner Sprache sind die Grenzen meiner Welt. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. So language by its very phenomenon is also a complex system. We could say that. Yeah. So the question that I want to put forth is, so now we have recognized that these are the limits. So with the limits, what are we going to do about them? Are we looking to transcend them, or are we looking to make use of them? We were speaking of Bergson in our chat as well as here. So Bergson at one point in Matter and Memory says that to know something or to understand something is to make use of it. What use are we making of the limits that we have recognized?
Better inhabit the world and not go running like a locomotive accelerated to the wall, against the wall. That's and orient better himself in order to build where we have to build and don't build where we don't have to build or we cannot to build. There is many useful thinking about that. I'm very skeptical from the purity of theoretical as such. So even better way of education, for example, at the frontiers between human science and natural science is something useful, because build a better society, a more informed society, and so on and so on. So you're right, fully right, that is every performance of every issue in knowledge can be useful. Maybe not in the short term, but it's useful.
So the way we are looking at making the word more habitable, more...
But in a complex world, the first utility is to be able to build sustainable, not just in scene of ecology, but of sustainable strategies. If you are focused on one model of growth, my society, for example, is not so resilient because I tend to uniformize every production, education, and so on, and the tissue of my society is no longer resilient because it's no longer elastic. Okay, So, for example, that is one useful thing. This is build new strategies, what we will approach in the last lecture.
There's also
So the problem is, I'm the first enemy to the request of utility of everything, in particular of philosophy, okay? But it don't means that something that looks in the short term, unuseful for practical, pragmatical purpose, in the long term become useful. Gödel theorems.
number theory was the biggest example.
Yeah.
So
Or gravitational theory. The invention of gravitation of Galileo,
even laser, for example, today it is used ubiquitously.
laser, but also Galileo, all speculation about Aristotelian astronomy, we use the movement of the planets? No, but with the revolution and theoretical mechanics, we can send now satellites on the Earth. Gödel for pure theoretical purpose, make this discover this incompleteness theorem. Some other takes that and implement to a machine. Some other talks the networks or the topology and implement to machine, and then we have what we have in the sense of technology.
To your question of when you said that limit of my knowledge is limit of my word, so
The language.
So one good example of explanation that I think David Deutsch gives it. He's father of quantum computing and a very good scholar. He says that it's not the limit of what all that we have known. Within the system, we can have further refinements. So still, even if we have a lot of limits to our current epistemology, within those limits, we have a lot of refinement to do of the concepts, of the systems, and through that we have discovered a lot of things and moved forward a lot within the framework. And then paradigm shifts also keep happening.
So the limits are not to be overcome, they are just to be formulated better.
That is one way of saying it, but the other way is that I think he also said it that even when we had the limit, mathematics reported one of the fastest rate of discoveries after these limits were discovered actually. Because for the first time we started looking into the inconsistencies within our systems and also started applying more ubiquitously all that we had at our disposal.
So the problem or the contestation that I have with this is, can we say the same about the system that a society is, that we recognize that, for example, racism is a problem, and this is a limit of our thinking, that we think in such a way that some races, quote unquote, are superior or inferior. So we have recognized the limit/problem. Now, would one say that this problem is a solvable problem?
So I have a very controversial take on that actually.
By a scientific culture, yes.
I have a very
By a
controversial...
scientific approach, the
Anthropology, ethnoanthropology, and so on, genetics, you can show, but you are not to show in a talk show. But if you pose ethnoanthropology and genetics on the core or on the basis of one matter, that is one new kind of education, at a certain point, the people will assimilate the fact that it is evident that racism is not a sort of natural, race is not a natural kind. Then xenophobia is another thing. It's not racism.
Also,
Then you have to handle with other tools, maybe socio-economical, political, but racism now is...
again, I don't see them, because there's a reason for that. Human consciousness for a very long time has started putting aesthetics of idea to certain sort of set of behaviors that we tend to display. Though these are aesthetically very profound, yet they have no functionality to inhibit us. In a more simple term, I think we are held hostage by the aesthetics of certain ideas which we don't innately understand. What is love? Like, we don't know, but there's
Baby, don't hurt me.
there's an aesthetic attached to it, so we somehow overemphasize on the idea, but nobody really knows what it is.
But who cares?
Yeah.
The problem is there is no answer to every question, but who cares?
Yeah.
There's, even to acknowledge that expect every answer for every question
Yeah.
is a moment of growth.
Deleuze, I think in there's a paper of Deleuze on control societies, societies of control. The idea of customs itself and the idea of how we categorize aesthetics into different we put aesthetics to almost every axiological premises that we are building right now in terms of how we are taking forward the humanity. And you see we are overcomplicating it, and with that we are compromising with the kind of sovereignty each individual ever had. The states are using them to censor you, states are using them to control you, and simultaneously these large giant corporations are using them to hold you hostage. The very password that we use to lock our phones are actually using us as the hostage, and they are using us as the lever to give us our individualized identities where we cannot perpetuate the commonality. It's like making us more docile if we meditate on the subject matter.
Yeah, that is also then Adorno for you.
Yeah, so that is why I don't know why I'm very critical nowadays of the aesthetic of the ideas and the axiological meanings that are being repopulated into every simple term. And that is where I see a lot of problem. Because then pure knowledge becomes a matter of politics. Science becomes school of politics. And that is where the danger lies.
To come back to the to come back to the point of how we're making use of it. So the sense that I'm getting from the lectures that we have so far is that we are the strategy that we will deploy is eventually that of a policy making.
An education to a understanding of the world in a complex way helps firstly in the short term for building policy-making strategies. That is acclaimed by everyone, implicit also for those that there is no complex. So top management complexity is applied in top management schools since the 90s. In the MIT, there is no question, for example, of criticizing complexity, formational system thinking. You know, so the application are many, but if you, once more, you have to decide on which scale, which measures are useful, and so on and so forth.
Energy comes into the picture.
But even I have a very layperson, very baby-like understanding of policy making. But even if you look at policy making, it is a top-down approach. And then when it is...
Why? No, there is also groups that make pressure in order to change the policy making.
Yeah, there are pressure groups as well. But then you have to make certain categories which may or may not look at all the contingent factors or elements that there are. For example, even COP26 or Paris Agreement, if we see, the carbon emissions, they are disparate when it comes to countries from certain regions. For example, Europe will essentially have less carbon emission, but countries like India and Bangladesh would have more. Are those taken into the consideration in policy making? And even when
they are considering in policy making, because my thesis title is on this concept. It's assessing the environmental, social and governance factors while making the modeling on behalf of crop price volatility. I'm trying to help the government, especially in our country. It's a Niti Aayog. They are generating this thing, policy and making, right? So I'm trying to figure out this thing because I'm incorporated the meteorological data into that, right? As you said. So yeah.
No, the problem is better work everywhere, not blind as blind. The elemental usefulness in it.
I think the best use of complexity you can see in politics. I deal with it every day.
So I come from I lived for in order to policy making structuring economy, and so on, not only from an ecological point of view. I come from a small town. I lived for 7 years in a small town, just a little Switzerland, very rich, that become rich very, very quickly by a sort of model of production, okay? The small valley I mentioned before, okay? The people rejecting every form of knowledge, every form of know-how that was not producing things, okay? The things that were produced, they were sort of industrial inductors. Don't caring about the complexity of the world, don't caring about the change of the economy, about the complexity of supply chains, many things. We produce, we sell, point. At a certain point, the world changes and you can do nothing, and your system is over. Poor thing, kaput, you know? Know how we do with a sort of mapping sustained by knowledge, by people that know what is complexity of economy, complexity of production, etc., how economy is changing, and so on, can have helped this system to transform itself in another, to anticipate the catastrophe, and to survive. This is given by knowledge. The useful scholars there are in the university that all industrial things that do nothing if they don't provide labels or new invention directly applicable to technology are useful because they can enlarge the horizon and map the horizon where you produce, when your people live, and so on and so on. That's just an example made concretely. For this example, complexity has been increased exponentially in top management school and not in the university, because the manager have to do how to act or to invest.
The philosopher we were talking about, Taleb, seeing he would help you with the policy side of it. There's a philosopher, he has a mathematical training from French academies, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He deals with a lot of complexity problems in finance and other similar domains, economics and all.
Yeah.
He has some interesting takes on what he is presently asking.
Yeah. The problem is to be kurzsichtig oder lang. This is myopia or looking to the horizon, you know, and looking to the in order not just to look to the horizon, but going into, because you're forced to by time, having a cartography at less is very useful.
My question is also somewhere related with this limitation or boundary condition in terms of the complexity space. Like in the Euclidean space, we have this. If we have a system which reflects the scale-free and non-scale-free, right? And if we have the scale-free,
And then Euclidean or mechanical Newtonian?
If I'm talking about in the Euclidean space one, but when I'm talking about the non-Euclidean one, like a hyperbolic space, so we have the scale-free scenarios there.
I will differentiate the thing. One thing is in the scale freedom or not. One thing is the dimensionality, because scale freedom ends from metrics, and then just by mediation ends from topology. But you can have just one topology. There's one space and different scales and so on, and so many topological space that involves the complex systems. So, for example, a society is not scale-free, okay? It depends from the scale and so on and so on. You have many scales on which you can individuate the system, but you have one topology, for example, physical. So there is not to do with the Euclidean space. One thing is scaling, one thing is dimensionality. Then they can converge, but they're not directly linked.
Because in a scale free, if we have the that interconnectivity with the nodes, like in the network theory is in the complex theory. So we can see the more closer nodes always making a kind of a hub.
Yeah.
Like hub, like we can correlate with the social network scenario also. If we have the celebrity, they are in somewhere in a one group, and influencer are in one group. But if we are talking about in the nuclear hyperbolic space, so there is a concept of the negative curvature, right? So negative curvature. So we have a diverse parallel because there is no that kind of parallel lines. No? There is a diverse parallel lines are there. So my concern is with this boundary conditions. So if we have that kind of scale-free network, so where should I limit for getting the optimized solution of that scenario? Yeah, if we have a concept of this complex theory, so there must be some kind of if we want a solution, there must be some kind of set of boundary condition must be there. No?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can't see. We have an infinity. Then
okay.
So how can we incorporate this Euclidean kind of concept to like if we have linearity in our data, so we can resolve it.
No,
the complete system is
okay. It's very complex as question. It's very difficult to answer. Let me just give a tip. You have not to implement. You have to be able to coordinate. There is two aspects. There is scale-free and many topological space, and you have to be able to think together, like we noticed yesterday when we said and they said. Also, there is no unificating grammar in order to translate one node of complexity in one other and one other. You have just to be able to correlate and to read the phenomenon in terms of, for example, both, like you said. Implement, no, because it's two different dimensions of considering the thing. But you can bring both in order to identify something as a complex system. Or the complex emergent patterns of something.
But we have the cosmic models also there now. So, yeah.
But most of them are like this. They are not refutable. By the very fundamental virtue of, so they're like schools of mathematics that are divided, and since we do not have a way to take the information from the system, these are becoming more like a political system. The string theory, for example, if I'm getting your question right, the string theory, it's not provable still. If I'm not wrong, it's not provable if it's correct or not correct. Similar thing goes with the transformers theory. These are the contesting ideas on quantum physics, the cutting edge ideas. On one side there's Leonard Susskind, he got a Nobel Prize, he's from the string theory school. And then there's Sir Roger Penrose, he got a Nobel Prize, he's from the transformers side. If I remember the term correctly, it's something T. So, but the problem with these systems is since you do not, as he said, so what he's trying to say is that you have to have a way to put a dynamics. Unless you have a framework to put dynamics to it, you cannot create a feedback loop. Unless you can create a feedback loop, you cannot reference it. And unless you can reference it, no chaos can be controlled, like can be measured also. Unless you have a good model to weigh, to simulate it. So in that sense, what he's trying to say,
as I discussed with you, that three-body problems question also. Yeah, in 2000, there were two scientists. So they were trying to figure out this the problem, because if we want that gravitational laws in our for resolving the things, so they both divided the bodies into the different components. Like if we have the two component, then we can implement the laws there.
Can you just send me the question, articulate tonight,
Okay.
and send me the question by mail? They have my mail?
Yeah.
You send my question, you can answer, because concern also the unity of ontological skills that we have to